We probably ought to just start like right from the beginning. Nobel laureate James Watson, he once stated, no one should be thought of as alive until about 3 days after birth, adding that the parents could then be allowed the choice to keep the baby or to allow the baby to die.
Do they like it first?
The other Nobel laureate of that famed partnership, Francis Crick, said that no newborn should be declared human until it has passed certain tests regarding its genetic endowment, and that if it fails those tests, then it forfeits the right to life. In other words, if its genetic endowment shows problems, i.e., Down syndrome or any kind of a autism or any kind of a genetic disorder, then it forfeits the right to live. Sadly, that is the way that many folks are approaching life and this idea today. Dr. Albert Liley, the renowned physiologist known as the father of fetology, he stated, biologically, at no stage of development can we subscribe to the view that the unborn child is a mere appendage of the mother. Genetically, the mother and the baby are separate individuals from conception. Okay, so we got some people who are saying this thing doesn't even have personhood until it's passed a genetic test. We've got this person who says the unborn child is a mere appendage of the mother. Genetically, the mother and the baby are separate individuals from conception. Before we discuss surrogacy for just a moment, I want to make sure we all understand one thing, and that is human life has never, ever stopped since God created the first person. You know, with all of our technologies and with everything that we're trying to do, scientifically speaking, the one thing that man cannot do is create life. And so the life that is on the planet today is literally a constant chain going all the way back to Noah and all the way back eventually to Adam. Don't miss out on that particular fact, because obviously what scientists are trying to do is to jumpstart that chain or break into that chain. And I think we all agree that in many public schools today, they're basically saying, hey, that chain doesn't exist. Life just evolved anyway. So here's our topic. What about surrogacy? Use of surrogate, a woman who agrees to carry a child to term. It's used when a mother is unable to carry an embryo to term. You've got two different types. You do need to know these. You've got a gestational surrogate who is not related to the embryo. In other words, it is literally just a woman who is hosting someone else's genetic material. Then you've got a traditional surrogate where that surrogate is related to the embryo in some way. Maybe a lady decides that she's too old. And so she allows her husband, through artificial insemination, to impregnate a surrogate mother. The surrogate then carries the baby to term, and then that baby is turned over. As faithful Christians, how do we approach this particular topic? What do you think, biblically speaking, are some points that we should consider?
Well, in that paper you gave us, talked about Abraham and his first child with the midwife that he brought in.
And what was the result of Hagar and Ishmael?
God told him to take Hagar and Ishmael out to the edge of the wilderness and leave them there.
Okay. So you got Abraham and Sarah. She's actually, it's a pretty good case study if you think about it. She is older in age. If you really look at the text, originally, it looks like she's already been through menopause. So you got a lady who is past childbearing age. God says, you're going to have a child. She laughs. She says, no, here, take my handmaid Hagar. Ishmael results from that relationship. God says, look, that's not the child I promise. You're basically going about this all wrong. Well, finally, when Isaac is on the scene, Abraham has to take Ishmael and Hagar out to the edge of the wilderness and send them away. The point being, that's still part of his own flesh and blood. So there we've got kind of a biblical example of the fact that, hey, there's a high price to be paid anytime you're trying to get around these original laws. What else? What are some other thoughts? Those of you who read the paper that I handed out, there's a quote on the very first page that I hope that you'll remember, in that it says, it is the transference of pain from one person who cannot have a child to someone else who's going to have to give that child up. Guys, there is a whole lot of truth in that statement right there. Because you got a situation where you got somebody who is absolutely just grief-stricken because they cannot have children, and now all of a sudden they finally get to have a child, and yet the surrogate mom, who's felt that child kicking and felt all the wonderful things in the womb, suddenly she's got to give that child up.
Brad,
Go ahead.
Can you put that slide back up? I didn't get that last for surrogacy.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
As a preacher, how would you counsel somebody in this particular situation? Chuck, what would you say?
First, I would ask them, which side of this would they be on, or does it matter?
Well, they're coming to you for advice. You got an infertile couple. And guys, listen to me very carefully. If you think you're going to be a preacher and that you are going to a congregation of, say, 200 people, and you're going to preach for 30 or 40 years, and you're never going to have a couple come to you with infertility problems, you better be thinking again. Because it's real, and there are people on this planet who want children so bad they're willing to do just about anything. So, Chuck, you're at your office, you got a couple, they got tears coming down their face. They want to know from your lips, do you feel like it's okay if they use surrogacy?
Well, I think I would definitely take them back to that example of Abraham and Sarah. Maybe not initially, but first I would ask them what they're trying to gain through having a surrogate mother. Are they just wanting a child so badly that they're willing to not only risk, really it could be a risk of their own salvation and the person who they're wanting to be the surrogate, because let's say something like this woman changes her mind and maybe the family just can't deal with it, and then they go off the deep end because they wanted this child so bad. I would ask them if that's worth it to them.
Okay. Let's look at three principles that I want you guys to think about if you are in a counseling situation. Principle number one. You need to ask the person, how far ultimately are they willing to go? Because that's gonna reveal to you a lot about their heart. You know, if somebody comes in your office and says, hey, we're exploring this, you need to know from the outset, okay, are they really exploring this, or basically they saying anything that a fertility clinic can offer us, we're considering. Remember we talked last week about IVF, in vitro fertilization, and we said there's problems with that because you've got leftover embryos. We talked about artificial insemination, and we talked about, hey, there's a difference between a sperm and egg with both husband and wife versus if you are introducing donor sperm or donor eggs, because now you violated the marriage bed. Same thing with surrogacy. You got to be very careful about whether or not you're going to be violating that marriage bed. So first thing is, how far are you willing to go? Number two, you need to make sure they understand that just because we can do something doesn't mean it's right. There are a lot of options out there, and just because those options exist do not mean that Christians need to be participating in those options. And finally, number 3, you need to make sure and you need to remind that couple that they can be good, faithful Christian servants whether they are blessed with children or not. You know, too often we have in our mind this idea that we're going to be incomplete if we don't get married, or we're going to be incomplete if we don't have children. Well, guys, there are plenty of biblical examples of individuals who were faithful to God who either weren't married or didn't have children. And so we need to remind ourselves that that's not the end-all, be-all, that we still can be faithful to Him without that. You know, if I'm sitting in that room, I would remind them of those principles, and then I would ask them, you know, is there some kind of a strong problem that you have with adoption? Because I think with adoption, some of the ethical issues that we're talking about right here are probably not going to be as strong. Now, we will talk about that adoption later on, but point in case is you don't have a surrogate mom who is hosting that child and may want to end up taking that child, and then you've got payment for that. You're giving that person money for services. So, Dustin, you got a comment?
Yeah, I can't, now, maybe just because my immaturity or my ignorance on the matter, but I can't imagine, I mean, telling somebody after they're stressed out, they've been trying to have kids for a long time, they really think they want to do this because they want to have their DNA in the child, and so they decide to do this, and then you come up and tell them, well, you can still be a faithful Christian and faithful to God if you don't have children. I can't imagine them looking at me as somebody respected and saying, well, they're going to look at me and tell me I don't understand, because I'm a preacher and that's what I'm supposed to say.
Okay, Dustin, let me throw this at you. Part of the problem with infertility is those couples get so wrapped up. Their entire world is based on nothing but fertility.
Right.
So much so that they lose perspective and they lose priorities. They forget that the world is still going around, that Jesus Christ's blood is still saving people, and that ultimately that is not really the goal of life. The goal of life is to get to heaven. Now, if you have children, you want to get them to heaven with you.
Right, of course.
So, you know, I think part of your job as a counselor / preacher is to remind them, look, while this is huge in your life and this is something that every single month you are focusing on, maybe you need to drop back, relax a little bit, and understand that you are still going to be acceptable in the sight of God if you never have children. You're going to be able to be a good servant to God.
I mean, which I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you, but I'm just trying to figure out, and now I know, but it seems like they would get offensive, if you approached them in the wrong way regarding that. So I just wonder.
They might. There again, they might, and that's where you're revealing more of a heart problem.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? These guys, trust me, these are what we're talking about in this whole class, all of this stuff is very, very emotional. A lot of it is big time tied to a emotional bomb, if you will. Because unless you've actually talked to or counseled folks who have gone through that 2, 3, 4 year period where every single month they are hoping, and every single month they're not having a child, and every single month they have somebody in the church say, hey, when are you going to start your family?
Yeah. And
it's just this massive snowball effect that is eating at them to where they feel like they can't get out from under it.
Right.
So, you know, sometimes I think it's our job to remind them, hey, the world doesn't hinge on whether or not you're going to have children.
Right.
Dean.
Oh, I didn't have a question.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment, question?
In my mind, I encourage, or I would encourage, and I have encouraged people to adopt. Because if it wasn't for adoption, I mean, I wouldn't be here today, you know, being a Christian. Someone's, in essence, saved my life because of adoption. And
Absolutely.
There's plenty of kids that need help, that grow up in dysfunctional homes, that have been beat, they see their parents beat, they've seen people shot, killed in front of their own eyes, and they don't have that comfort of someone to show them something different. So I always encourage adoption because if you're not able to have kids, I mean, in my mind,
Absolutely.
I hope nobody takes this wrong, but if you're not allowed to have if you're not able to have kids, God knew that.
Yeah.
And
And I totally agree with you. One of the things I would point out to the class, and you guys know my background is in anatomy. Physiologically speaking, it's very funny to me that many couples who are struggling cannot have children. Oftentimes, it is because of stress. It is because they are so stressed out to try to have a child that it actually does one of two things. It either changes their internal temperature or the pH just enough to where either the sperm aren't good swimmers or the eggs are too warm or the pH is not a good environment. They go and they take Mr. Quinton's advice and they get a child through adoption. You know what happens within 6 months? They're pregnant. Because their bodies have relaxed, and physiologically speaking, things turn back to normal. So,
that's a stupid question. What's pH?
do what?
What's pH?
pH measures the acidity in a system. So, like the normal is pH of 7. Your body has a normal pH level, and long story short, the sperm and the egg have to have a particular pH. They have to live in a particular environment, whether that's basically neutral. If it's too acidic, obviously it's not going to live. If it's too alkaline, it's not going to live either. So just a small change in pH can alter that. All right, let's move on to a side to this. Now this one's kind of tied to it. Because you've got couples who say, okay, I can't have a child, but maybe we can clone a child. What used to be the stuff of science fiction now confronts us. Cloning is among the most challenging innovations of biotechnology. A year and a half ago, Doug Melton at Harvard University received permission to start cloning humans. 2 weeks after Harvard made its announcement that they were going to be doing this, the University of California at San Francisco announced that they were going to be trying as well. And so now we've got basically a race to see who can clone the first human being.
What was the other school, Brad?
University of California, San Francisco. UCSF.
What was the date on that, Brad? 19.
It's about a year and a half ago, so you're looking at probably like 2008-ish. First thing we got to talk about in talking about human cloning is perception versus reality. There is a perception around this issue, and then there's a reality around this issue. For instance, perception is the awareness or belief based on your ideas and your experiences. In other words, your perception of human cloning is what you feel, is what you think. But then there is the reality. And that is truth that is not dependent upon what you think or what you even understand. These two terms, as we see throughout ethics, are important all the way throughout to kind of keep in mind that while we all may have opinions and that we all may have perceptions, that there is an underlying reality and that we've got to get down to that reality. I'll show you what I mean by that. For example, you got gravity. Some folks have a perception of gravity, but we know what the reality of it is. What about hot and cold? You guys may have a perception of what is hot and what is cold that may differ from mine, but there is a reality that defines this as hot or this as cold. Same thing with right and wrong. We've talked about basically you cannot have morals or ethics unless you have a standard. God is our standard. The Bible is our standard for right and wrong. So in looking at perception versus reality,
Good grief, I've been cloned.
all right. A little history on human cloning. Goes all the way back to 2002. December the 27th. We have Dr. Bridget Boisselet of Clonaid announced that she and her fellow scientists had produced the first human clone, a little girl they called Eve. Just days later, Clonaid announced the birth of a second human. So this happened back in 2002. The problem is, this group of people is led by a guy by the name of Rael, who believes that humans were cloned by intelligent life forms from outer space, and his Clonaid scientists have yet to produce proof of this clone. So we got this guy out there who back in 2002 says, hey, we've cloned people. But he's never given proof this will be the same guy that thinks we came from aliens. Obviously, we don't put a whole lot of stock in his announcement. If we're looking at cloning in general, we go all the way back, for instance, to 1978 when Dr. Watson said, cloning, particularly of something so complex as a mammal, cannot be done with an adult cell. And when you look at that, you need to understand, first and foremost, this guy was kind of foolish for saying that because science changes all the time. Can we clone things? Guys, we've been cloning things. We were actually cloning things before he made this statement. 1953, Dr. F.C. Stewart was cloning leopard frogs. We've been cloning vegetables that you eat in the supermarket for decades. Here's our objectives today. We need to know what is cloning versus what is human cloning. How is cloning done? What are the types? What then are the ethical, the physical ramifications? How do stem cells tie in with cloning? And then obviously we need to come to a conclusion on the matter as far as what is expected, what is a Christian's response to cloning. Here's a broad general definition. If somebody were just to come up to you off the street and say, hey, you know, what does it mean to clone something? It is a process of creating an identical copy of an original. It's been around for many, many years. Although cloning occurs naturally, cloning typically refers to an identical copy produced by conscious design. Now, when I say it occurs naturally, somebody give me an example of that.
Say that again.
Without any kind of synthetic form?
It's although cloning occurs naturally, the type that we're talking about here is going to be talking about the kind where we go into a laboratory and we consciously design a clone. What would you say is natural cloning?
Twins aren't natural, are they?
Identical twins, maybe?
Okay, I could go for that. What else?
The replication of cells.
Replication of, well, yes and no, depending on the type of cell. Guys, here's the big difference that maybe you're not seeing. All humans and most animals reproduce sexually. There is what's called asexual reproduction, which is where something literally just splits in two, and where yesterday it was one, now it's two. We call it budding, we call it spore, we call it whatever, but if you think about it for just a moment, there are some single-celled organisms out there that clone themselves every single day, where they go through a process of producing an exact genetic duplicate of themselves. So cloning in general has been around for a long, long time. The problem was always, how do we go from vegetables and leopard frogs to actually cloning something that might be useful? Tell me why we would want to clone animals.
Well, a lot of like animal rights people, they want to clone them for extinct species that are getting close to, extinction.
Okay, so let's say we've got a cheetah that we feel like his line's going down, so we clone a cheetah and we got a bunch of cheetahs.
Yeah.
So one might be because of extinction. What else?
Use them for
Adrian.
resources? Food.
Use them for food, resources, okay?
The best of the best.
You can pick the best cow and make it a whole bunch of times.
Best
There, now you are starting to warm up. What if you got a racehorse that's really fast?
Make money off of it.
It's like an automobile.
make more of them and get more money.
They'll never
I
die.
don't know if you guys are up to speed on breeding, but there is a very, very, very high dollar market for instance, for the sperm from a particular horse line or bull line, because the odds are you're going to make a very healthy animal, whether it be a racehorse, whether it be a bull that packs on lots and lots of meat. You're talking high dollars. So if you can skip all of that and simply clone the Kentucky Derby winner, or if you can clone a prize bull or a Tennessee walking horse or whatever, suddenly you're not talking about taking odds that hopefully the sperm and egg will produce a really good thing. You're creating a genetic duplicate of that thing.
But then the horse races, they would never win. They would always tie.
What?
That's 3 for today, buddy.
If all the horses were the same, they would always tie. They would never win because they're the same horse.
Yes, Quentin, but see, you would also have to figure out what year did you create it, how old is it, are you going to run it as a 3-year-old filly, etc. And so you sneak it in when there's not another one around and you win the race.
Most definitely.
Sneaky.
What about this one, guys? What about somebody who has got an emotional attachment to an animal?
Oh, yeah.
They'll never die.
Oh, yeah, the dogs and the cats and the people who stuff them.
Do you think there are people out there that would be willing to pay a lot of money for their dog to come back from the dead?
Surgery and stuff.
I think there are already people who are trying to have that done, aren't there?
There are, absolutely. The first cat was called CC, as in copycat. There's now dogs that have been cloned. So
Are they
the
retarded?
next, no, they're not retarded. The next question, the next obvious question,
Talking about the dog?
would be
No, well, I'm talking about the animal because
no. No, the animal is a genetic. We're going to talk about that in a minute. If you can get a dog line, and let's say you've got a German Shepherd that gets killed, and you bring that German Shepherd back to life through cloning, you got a genetic duplicate, looks just like it. Do you think there are going to be parents that want to try to take advantage of this same technology if they lose a child?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Brett,
Yes, sir.
what about, for instance, hypothetically, let's say the world supply of beef has gone down. Would it be okay to clone, cows in order to supplement that supply? That way more people aren't going hungry.
We already do that.
Really?
Yeah, we're already cloning both vegetables and animals. Yeah.
Are you against that?
Ethically speaking, here's where I'm at with that. God gave us dominion over His creation. So we have the right to be basically in charge of everything. I think we ought to be responsible. Now, if that means, hey, we can do this and we can feed a lot of people, that may be a good thing. Me personally, I don't want to be eating any kind of genetically engineered meat or vegetables. I think, basically I always keep going back to the fact that, hey, if God created it, it's good. If man has messed with it, it's kind of like the government. It's bad. So that's just kind of where I am. So I try to steer clear of any kind of genetically engineered stuff.
How do you know if you're getting that though? Do they tell you it's been cloned by organic?
Actually, a lot of it nowadays they're having to start putting on the label, believe it or not. But there for the longest time they didn't have to. I mean, guys, surely y'all have walked through the grocery store and you've seen the like the vegetables where they're crossing, for instance, cauliflower and broccoli, or maybe they're crossing
Apples and grapes.
different kinds of fruits or whatever.
They have those.
So it looks, wow, that's cool, but the point is, hey, we did that in a laboratory. That's not necessarily natural. All right.
I think if God wanted us to do it, have anything to do with life, He would have consulted us, talked to us about it. But as far as life goes, I think we should just leave life alone. I mean, why would you want to prolong the life? I mean,
Okay, so you don't think God gave us the right to do anything with animals?
I think we're clear in that area. You can be clear in that area, but when it comes to human life, that's where you're wrong. I believe you're wrong.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we would agree with that. Let's take a little history lesson real quick. If we go all the way back to 1997, the February 27th issue of Nature magazine arrived, and in that particular magazine, a guy by the name of Dr. Ian Wilmot from the Roslin Institute in Scotland announced that he had been successful at cloning a sheep. Now, guys, in order for you to really understand the importance of this, people had been trying for many, many years before him. So basically, when this hit the newsstands, most scientists thought this was garbage. We didn't think it really happened. And then we realized he was able to do it. He was successful. Basically what Dr. Wilmot did, and I'm going to give you the very unscientific, dumbed-down version because I think this is the easiest way to understand. He scraped a cell off of a 6-year-old sheep, off the mammary gland of that sheep. So you guys that have ever milked cows, you know, well, sheep have got mammary glands as well. He scrapes a cell off of that. It's 6 years old. He puts it into a petri dish. And then he starved that cell almost to death. It didn't give it enough nutrients. It basically starts going into a hibernation mode. Systematically, cells will shut down any non-essential functions before they die. It's kind of their way of saying, okay, what is the minimal things that we need to stay alive? Everything else goes. Right before that little cell died, Dr. Wilmot did two things. He zapped it with electricity, and then he shoved nutrients into it. And the little cell woke up, and it forgot where it came from. It forgot that it was a 6-year-old mammary gland cell, and so it started to reproduce. Now, let's see if I can find my slide. I don't have it on here. Basically, all he had to do at that point was take that growing material and stick it into a surrogate sheep. If you look over there on the left. A couple of months later, Dolly was born. Now, somebody tell me, what do we know about Dolly? Where is Dolly today?
In the ground.
She is deader than a hammer. How old was Dolly when she died?
Not too old.
Man, that would have been a great bonus question for a test. A little extra credit. How old was Dolly? Dolly was 6 years old when she died. What is the average lifespan of a sheep?
Older than that.
Longer than 6.
How about 12 to 15?
That qualifies.
Why is that important? Guys, Dolly died at age 6 of advanced diseases. They now believe she had a 6-year head start because that cell that she was originally cloned from was 6 years old. When they looked, for instance, at the telomeres of her chromosomes, they were already coming apart just like an older adult. She had really, really, really bad arthritis at basically age 4, which is unheard of in a sheep. She dies at age 6 of these advanced old age disorders. The point being, we're pretty sure now that because they used a 6-year-old cell, she had a 6-year head start. Even though she went through infant baby sheep stages, her cellular programming already had a 6-year head start in it. which does not bode well if you've got somebody like a Ted Turner who thinks, hey, I'm going to use human cloning and I'm going to achieve immortality. I'm going to take my genetic material and I'm going to clone a bunch of Ted Turners. Well, it looks like probably Ted Turner's going to give him about a 70-year head start. And if I had to look like Ted Turner, that would not be a good thing.
So they didn't have to fertilize that cell at all. It just turned into a sheep.
Exactly.
Wow.
We're going to talk about how it did that in just a moment. Actually, I can go ahead and show you that slide. Give me just a second.
Crazy.
All right, here we go. Here's the difference, guys. On the screen, you see two different ways to reproduce. At the top, you've got normal sexual reproduction. That is what we do. That's what all normal animals do. You got a sperm and egg, they combine, they make fertilization, they make a single cell embryo. Well, with cloning, what you do is you take a donor cell that you see there at the bottom corner, you isolate the genetic material. You have an egg cell that you strip out all of the genetic material. You shock that donor material. You give it a lot of nutrients to where it wakes up and it realizes, hey, wait, I don't know what I am. I don't know if I'm a 6-year-old mammary gland cell or if I'm an embryo. So I'm just going to basically reset and start dividing. They insert that material into the new egg, and lo and behold, it starts splitting and dividing just like it would.
Wow.
So you're talking about a situation where you are needing the genetic material of only a single individual. You no longer need a male and a female. Questions or comments on that before we move on?
How long did the sheep like the original sheep that Dolly was cloned from live? Did they die the same day?
No. The original sheep that Dolly was cloned from, now understand, all they did was they scraped cells off of her. It'd be like if I took a Q-tip swab and ran it in your mouth to grab some cells, you would go on and live your life normally. Now you're asking if the one that Dolly, did it die at age 12? That I don't know. I don't remember if I don't think they have peer reviewed, like, if that one died from arthritis or whatever. I don't know that information is even out there. So here's Dolly. That was in 1997, guys. That's not that long ago. Since that time, we've successfully cloned sheep, goats, pigs, cattle, mice, horses, mules, deer, cats, rabbits, and dogs. Now, I say this, tongue in cheek, but, the reality of it is, why in the world would you want to clone rabbits? It's not like they don't need a whole lot of help. When you look at that list, what stands out to you when you look at that list?
We don't really need any of that.
Are these all mammals?
They're all mammals, guys. Every single one of the creatures on the screen in front of you has been cloned since 1997, and every single one of those are mammals. What is a human from a biological classification?
A mammal.
A mammal. So then we ask the question, we say, all right, what is human cloning? If we're moving in that direction, what is human cloning? Well, human cloning is the creation of a genetically identical copy of an existing or previously existing human. It is one of the hottest topics right now, and it is actively ongoing in research. How is it done? Common method is basically exactly what they used with Dolly. I'm throwing two very big scientific techniques on the screen. if I were you, I wouldn't worry so much as about being able to explain every single detail, but I would at least know something about these. Somatic cell nuclear transfer is what we were just talking about, and that is how they basically took some genetic material they removed udder cells from a white-faced sheep. They put that genetic material into an empty egg cell from a black-faced sheep. They zapped it with electricity, gave it some nutrients, and lo and behold, implanted that into a surrogate black-faced sheep mother who gave rise to a white-faced dolly. The black-face thing was actually very important in Ian Wilmot's work because they wanted to make sure what came out of that sheep was not genetically linked back to the mom, the surrogate. And so by doing that, by basically saying, look, we're going to use a black face as a surrogate, you can pretty much make sure that what you get out was what was cloned. Comments, thoughts on that?
Is this essentially what happens to stem cells?
Well, we're getting there.
Okay.
Somebody tell me any potential problems you see thus far out of what we talked about just with mammals.
As far as the animals are concerned, or the humans?
Well, with the whole cloning process.
Well, kind of like, they say in the Oak Express commercials, it's not natural.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's biblical, is it?
It is definitely not biblical.
Yeah.
How would you say that somatic cell nuclear transfer or cloning is different from sexual reproduction?
Well, sex.
No sexual reproduction.
What is the one major difference?
There's only one person. There's no second party.
Right. You've got a single creature or single animal that is the parent. Now, here's the point, guys. Think about that in terms of where we're moving in the legal system. Who is going to be given legal paternity over a clone? Is it the person who donates the cell? Is it the two parents that want the child? Is it the surrogate that hosts the child? Or is it the scientist that actually makes the clone? And if you want to talk about having some messed up dilemmas, I mean, we are literally on the cusp of it, because here's the deal. In science, you know what we get to do with anything that we actually make? We get to copyright it or patent it. And therefore, we can even profit from it. So the point being, Ian Wilmot was able to patent Dolly. That was his creation. What could be some problems with that?
That's not a human, is it? It's not the rights of a human if it's, owned.
What do you mean by that?
Because, if somebody owns, has a patent on that, they can't do what they want. They don't have free will rights.
Right. Okay, so let's say that, KJ, let's say that I'm a scientist. And I have a creature that is 45% human, 55% horse. And I tweak the formula to where this creature has the strength of a horse and the wisdom of man.
Whoa.
I get to patent it. And I want to sell these on the free market as farmhands.
You're going to be rich.
What's the problem?
They have free will, but they're still, they're considered product. And that's morally wrong. Because you're
Okay.
Is it?
No,
No.
it's not. I hope not.
Is it human?
Not technically.
It's not.
Okay, I'll go ahead and throw this out. We'll get to this. We'll get back to this here in just a little bit. But guys, almost every country, and I'll show you here pretty soon. But most of the countries have put a ban on human cloning. I would point out America has not done that, even though what we're thinking, I don't know. But most of the civilized countries have banned human cloning. Scientists are smart enough to realize, okay, if you won't let me clone a human, I can add just a little bit of mouse DNA, or I can add just a little bit of monkey DNA, or I can add just a little bit of name your DNA of your choice. And so now you got a creature that is 99 or 98% human, 2% something else. From a legal, scientific definition, you can no longer call that a human. Technically, it's not a human. So you can clone that all day long. I don't know what you call it. I mean, we call them chimeras in science, which is a mixture of creatures. But it's not a human.
Is that where they got the catfish?
Another
To
problem.
what?
Is that where we got the catfish?
Oh, killing me. All right, what do you get?
Brad?
Yes.
Have you seen the movie I, Robot?
Oh yeah.
I have not.
Okay, I was gonna say, I picture something like that happening if you were able to clone or mix.
Okay, give me the quick lowdown.
Creates robots, they're humans, or they think like humans, they're our servants pretty much.
And then they take
Then they get their own, somehow they get their own free will, they figure out they want to take over, and we have trouble containing them, maintaining them.
Okay.
So if you have like the strength of like you mentioned, like the strength of a gorilla and the wisdom of a human, you're in some trouble.
Right. Well, I mean, in all seriousness, guys, it is progressing that way. You got to remember, I was doing clinical research not that long ago, and one of the unwritten rules in clinical research and clinical science is basically if you can outpace the ethical rules and guidelines, then you don't have to ask for permission. So in other words, there are laboratories right now that are doing things where the laws are not in place yet because they haven't said, hey, look, we're taking these weird creatures and we're combining them, or we're doing all kind of weird genetic splicing, because they don't want the legislation yet. They would rather go ahead and get this thing done and then say, oh, you mean we shouldn't have been doing that? Well, now we've got it. Let's just deal with it. What do you get if you clone a human being?
Human being.
Okay. Like, for instance, if we cloned a cell from Adolf Hitler,
You got problems?
do we get another Adolf Hitler?
Where would you get? Yeah, where would you get the soul from?
No,
The,
you don't.
you
Nature versus nurture.
You get physical replica.
Yeah. Now you may have some of the same mental deficiencies, some of the same physical problems in his brain.
You get an exact, look at this, guys, genetic duplicate, not an exact duplicate. And by that I mean, would you get somebody who looks just like Adolf Hitler? The answer is absolutely yes, you would. And in fact, if he trimmed his mustache that way, he'd look dead up like him. But would it be Adolf Hitler? The answer is absolutely not, because we are more than just a bag of genes. We are the total encompassment of all of our learning, all of our nurturing, all of the educational experiences. And therefore, basically you would have to put this this Adolf clone through exactly the same steps in the same time zone, in the same order, in order to try to get somebody that would be a dictator and try to take over the world. The cloned Adolf Hitler may end up being one of the nicest, kindest priests in the world. Who knows what he would turn out to be? It would depend a lot on what kind of nurturing he gets.
Hey, Brad.
Yes, sir.
If our soul, we know that our soul is, we know our soul is set on conception, right? Is that the spirit, the right way to? I guess
Keep going. I'm listening. I'm listening.
All right, we as Christians view life from conception, so that means that our soul came from heaven at conception. Is what I'm saying. So if you clone something that doesn't have how does that clone have a soul? Because God didn't create it, man did.
In other words, you want the answer to the question on the screen.
Oh. Oh, that could be.
How'd you know?
You are absolutely so lucky in that we're going to get to that in about 20 minutes or so.
Okay.
All right, let's get back to Adolf Hitler for just a second. Or Dean or whoever, if we clone Dean. Would it be another Dean Meadows? Obviously, we would all hope not. That is so true. That is so, in so many ways, that is so true. You guys tell me some things that actually change who we are. Because the reason I'm asking you this is I want you to understand society is trying to sell our kids and you the message that we are just a bag of neurons and that basically you cannot alter what is already programmed up there. What kind of influences will alter the end result of a person?
Life experiences.
Trauma.
Well, let's say you clone Dean. Like, the new Dean isn't going to be like Dean because Dean had parents. This guy will have scientists, it'll be completely different.
Well, you have to drop them on your childhood and your upbringing.
Okay, so your parents, I'm hearing somebody say parents makes a deal. Big difference. Okay, I heard somebody say life experiences make a difference. What else?
Cultural influences.
Culture makes a difference.
Everything.
Education.
Education is going to make a difference. So, guys, the point being, all of these factors are going in to make this person who it is. There are a lot of rich people on this planet who have already kind of given money to be cloned when the procedure becomes available, with the idea that basically they're going to be able to look and lo and behold, Paris Hilton's going to have a twin. But what Paris Hilton doesn't realize is, when you think about it for just a moment, first and foremost, that clone has to go through infancy. So you'll never have a clone being exactly the same age as the person, because you've always got to have that 9 months of gestation, birth, and then infancy. So even if we clone Paris Hilton right now, Lord forbid, she would be having a Paris Hilton baby on her hands rather than her. Secondly, would it be like Paris Hilton?
Let's hope not.
The answer is no, because you got all of these different influences that have made her who she is today that may not have gone into that child.
And are they thinking about doing this so they could use body parts from this creation, I guess, like for later use? Is that why it might be so popular?
Yeah, that's part of it. We're going to talk about the difference between therapeutic cloning, which is what you're talking about,
Right.
versus reproductive cloning, which is just making another individual. Let's look for just a minute at a little bit of stuff that has already gone on, just to give you guys an idea that what we're talking about today is not science fiction. It's not stuff that is going to be happening years from now. This is real. This is stuff that is actually going on. 1998, scientists at Advanced Cell Technology in Massachusetts reported they had created a transgenic cow-human hybrid embryo. They had taken material from a human being and a cow, spliced it together, allowed it to grow for 5 days, and then intentionally destroyed it. The very next year, Japanese researchers, using the same techniques, produced 27 of these cow-human embryos. Again, they allow them to grow for somewhere between 5 and 12 days. Usually somewhere around day 12, day 15, you can no longer consider it a blob. And so it kind of, that's when in many fields of science, that's when it's its personhood. So at that point, you got to do one of two things. You either have to kill it, or you have to have permission to be working in that field on that particular creature. A couple of years ago, New Zealand scientists reported that they had cloned the first human pig embryo. So, all of this stuff is going on. Now, somebody give me a reason why. We've already talked about one reason why they would do this.
Why they would do that?
Why would they mix it? I don't understand why they'd mix up an animal with a human. I don't understand.
I guess to have the intelligence of a human or something.
Right.
For judgment, for self.
Okay, let's say you wanted a smart pig that could help you farm. Hey, pig, go over and get the plow and plow up the back 9 for me. Pig says, okay, oink, oink, whatever.
Hey, Brett, this sounds weird, but would that set in place, would that legalize bestiality? Not trying to be funny or anything, seriously.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't. Would this be considered bestiality?
People already do with like a natural horse. So
Yes.
having horse and human almost would justify what they were doing, in my mind. They had that.
Possibly. Obviously, you're always going to have people who are bent on having very peculiar sexual practices. But in my mind, this doesn't have anything to do with that so much, just because unless you go through scientific means, a human being cannot reproduce with an animal. They're having to splice this DNA together. You can't, if you have relations with a sheep, you're not going to make a human sheep.
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Go on.
What are you saying?
I'm not saying anything. Let's move on. I'm holding up class.
All right. Okay. One of the saddest things that I heard about, and this was back in July of 2001, issue of Fertility and Sterility magazine, reported that the Howard and Georgian Junes Institute Reproductive Medicine, Norfolk, Virginia, they paid women volunteers somewhere between $1,200 and $2,000 each for their eggs. So they collect these eggs from these ladies. Basically, they give them a drug like we talked about last week. They overstimulate their ovaries. They collect their eggs. Those eggs are then fertilized with donor sperm, resulting in 50 healthy living embryos, knowing that the whole time they're going to destroy these embryos simply to get to the stem cells inside. So in other words, we now are paying money knowing we're going to create life in order to destroy it.
Brad, it's premeditated.
Yes, sir.
Isn't this exactly what they were talking about doing in Missouri a couple of years ago? That the law that it was a big, huh? Yeah, there's a big hot button ballot initiative that they voted on in Missouri that Michael J. Fox and some other people supported, that would have allowed them to do this in order to harvest stem cells.
Because they want the stem cells.
And it passed.
So I'm showing you guys this so that you leave class today with a full knowledge that, hey, all of this stuff that we've talked about, that's not science fiction. It's not just Brad bringing up weird, animal farm kind of stories. This is real stuff. This is really happening. In fact, I'm just giving you a brief sample of what's going on out there. You can just imagine what people are already trying to do. I asked you the question a minute ago when I put these up on the screen. I said, why do you think they're doing it? Number one, it gets them around a worldwide ban of cloning. And number two, they do get the right to patent or copyright anything that they create.
So, I have a question regarding that then, Brad.
Yes, sir.
If you clone a human, the creator is no longer God, it is the scientist. So all the scripture in the Bible that has the reference of God being the creator is not valid to those people.
We will talk about that when we talk about does it have a soul.
Man, you always put the thing off.
Because think about this. What you just said is a very large assumption in that ultimately who is going to determine if we can even do this in the first place? God. You know, it's not a done deal that he's going to allow us to play with human life like this. It's only going to be if he decides that we can do that.
Right.
And so if that be, you know, if that's the case, then obviously we'll have to deal with it then. But we're going to talk about does it have a soul, would it be considered personhood, that kind of stuff in just a moment.
Brad?
Yes, sir.
Based on what we've already talked about, we talked about on Tuesday.
Yep.
As to when life begins, it's already being done.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I was.
These are already human beings who are being created and then destroyed.
Right. That's the point. That's why I'm saying this is a travesty, guys.
So God, but
That's what my point was.
you're saying that God's already allowing this to happen.
That
Are you saying?
Okay, wait.
How much farther? How much
Wait.
He's not.
Hold on. Let's make sure we're on the same page. Are you talking about this right here?
Sure.
Okay. This is not cloning.
No.
What I had up on the screen is simply combining sperm and egg just like God intended to make a life form. Okay?
The cow-human hybrid.
They still.
Those are embryos, right?
Those are not humans. Well, I don't know what you would call them.
They kill humans to make them, though, right?
No, they did not kill humans. They took DNA from a human cell. So, for instance, we scrape off a skin cell from Brad Harrub. We look at the nucleus of that cell. We grab out the DNA of that cell. We unravel the DNA. We splice in some DNA with a cow.
Okay.
Or with a pig. We put all of that genetic material into an egg cell, an empty egg cell of a human or a cow or whatever. We allow it to then grow for so many days to see that, yes, it's going to divide, and it is going to actually become something, and then they kill it.
But you know, but you know, one day somebody's going to let that grow though, in some back room, you know.
Why do they bother?
Absolutely. Why they kill it? Because after somewhere around day 12 to 15, in the scientific community, you have to have the requirements to work on human specimens past that day is like 20-fold more as far as red tape and what you can and can't do and all the ethical things about informed consent and yada, yada, yada. Whereas before that, they don't really view that as being life.
Okay, but they don't view it as being human either, correct?
They don't really view it as being anything up until about day 12, and at that point, then they say, hey, it's divided enough, it's now a blastocyst or a zygote, now we can't let you just play with that any old way you want to. Because if you did, think about how many Frankenstein laboratories we'd have if you could just play with humans at will. Now, ironically, why did they pick that day? I don't have a clue. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand their rationale of saying, hey, up until this point, you can do anything you want to. You can give it You can make it glow in the dark. You can give it wings. You can make it whatever you want to do to it. You can make it happen. But after that point, you've either got to destroy it or you've got to have the proper paperwork and permissions to keep going forward with your research. John.
Brad, don't you believe that there might be some of those Frankenstein laboratories, alive today around the world? I mean,
Absolutely.
If they're going that far, if they're that unethical, they're not going to go and say, "Oh, okay, we're going to abide by your laws." They're going to.
Do you want to know where they are? Most of them. I said, do you want to know where those labs are?
Okay.
Most of the labs, like you're talking about, are sitting right off the coast of the United States of America on smaller islands that are not under the legal restrictions of the U.S.
Wow.
And so, go ahead.
Wouldn't this also go back to when you're talking about abortion on when a baby is actually, because you're kind of messing with that time frame as well. They start life then when they start dividing cells. I mean, obviously conception is not.
It begs the question, if it's not human, what is it?
Right.
In those first 12 days or 5 days or however many days you want to say, if that is not a growing human being, what is it? And if it's not a human, it's like the old argument about, okay, if it's not living, leave it alone.
Right.
Why do you have to destroy it if it's not living? Right. Well, they got to destroy it because if they leave it alone, 9 months later, they're going to have a child.
So they kind of have double standards.
Absolutely. And again, guys, I know some of you are starting to get your topics together for the ethics paper. Understand that when you start doing your research, one of the things that you're going to find, if you really do your research properly, is that the bottom line on every single bit of what we're talking about comes back to that greenback. It's money. And that's what drives a lot of stuff in this world. John?
I believe you in some degree, but I also believe that there are scientists out there that their full intent is to disprove God, discredit God.
Absolutely.
And it's not driven by money. It's driven by their hatred towards God. I look at that in this issue as far as stem cells and cloning, and I also see it in such projects as NASA and trying to show life on other planets and such like that. I mean,
But don't you ultimately think that part of that is about power and fame?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, I agree.
And power and fame oftentimes comes back to
That's true.
money. And I'll give you guys the lowdown on that. If you think about Ian Wilmot for just a moment, the guy, he's going to get a Nobel Prize. That's pretty much in the bank because he cloned the first sheep. He cloned the first mammal. Nobel Prize these days is going somewhere around $3 to $5 million. So this guy's going to get a check that is worth $3 to $5 million, tax-free, by law in every nation. It's not like if you win the lottery, you got to give them a bunch. Now this one, you get to deposit the whole thing, and with a Nobel Prize in science, unlike what Al Gore gets, you can pretty much go and work anywhere you want to work. I mean, you talk about fame and talk about prestige and power and money. But John's right in that there are some people out there who have a active vendetta against God. And they view this as a way of basically saying, look, we can create life without God. And so that's what they're actively trying to do. Now, I'd add the fame, power, and glory and all that stuff to it, but that's kind of where it is. 2 types of cloning that you guys need to be very familiar with. There's reproductive cloning, and there is therapeutic cloning. The difference between the two. Reproductive cloning, after somatic cell nuclear transfer, the new life is implanted in a surrogate mother, allowed to grow and be born. Whereas therapeutic cloning after somatic cell nuclear transfer, instead of implanting the cloned embryo, researchers then use the cells as raw material for experiments or as a collection source for specific cell types, namely stem cell research. How are they the same?
You go back, Brad?
Certainly. So you've got reproductive cloning, where reproductive cloning means you are going to have an organism, an animal that is born. It's going to be placed into a surrogate. It's going to grow and eventually be born. With therapeutic cloning, most of the therapeutic is happening in a culture test tube environment. That embryo is allowed to grow to a certain stage, usually somewhere around the 12-day stage, where it's got a blastocyst where they can suck off stem cells. Again, how are they the same? Both types of cloning, reproductive and therapeutic, produce life. Guys, that's the bottom line on what we're talking about. I mean, I'll go back here for just a minute. Reproductive cloning, you got something that's allowed to be born. Therapeutic cloning, it's not allowed to be born, but is it still life? Do we consider an embryo life? Yeah. All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about the implications. Then we'll let you guys take a little break. First implication. Cloning can be used to provide children for unmarried couples or unmarried people. Basically, if you think about it this way, you find somebody that you like or you think is exceptionally good looking. If you can talk them out of a cell, you got some offspring. If the husband or wife carry a genetic defect, the spouse could be cloned to provide a healthy offspring. In other words, you get married. Let's say that Dean gets married and Dean's wife says, I don't want any children looking like you, so we're going to clone me. Now that's just a hypothetical situation. Number 3, parents could pre-select the sex of their children. How would you know for sure you're going to get a girl?
Like clone a girl?
You take a cell from what?
A woman?
From a female. Guys, if you start out with a female cell, you're going to get a female. You got 2 X's and not XY. Number 4, women's liberation certainly would be complete since no male would be needed for reproductive purposes. The old saying of it takes a man to make a girl is no longer true. Number 5, large batches of human clones could be made for statistical studies. And again, guys, if you think that there's not folks who would want that, you got to be out of your mind, because one of the biggest things on statistics in looking at the efficacy of drugs or efficacy of different therapeutic conditions is they would love to have, say, 100 or 1,000 of the exact same individual so they can close down how many variables there are.
Brad?
Number 6. Clones can be produced in order to harvest spare parts for transplants. In other words, you could produce these in order to have bone marrow or organs for people who are on the organ donor list. Number 7, people enamored of their own importance could ensure that exact genetic duplicates of themselves were brought into existence by cloning. By tens, by hundreds or thousands, if they so desired, guaranteeing them immortality of sorts, at least in body, if not in spirit. Number 8, you got single adults who could produce children. Number 9, you got homosexual couples could produce children. Number 10, when cloning single males or homosexuals, a surrogate mother would be required. We've already talked a little bit about all the insanity that a surrogate would bring into the case. Guys, it's a very ethical nightmare just having a surrogate. Imagine, if you will, having a clone and a surrogate. How many legal quandaries you could fall into if that thing went south. And last but not least, likely thousands of cloned embryos would die, mutate, or end up being destroyed in order to achieve a single success. Questions, thoughts, comments so far? Everybody get the implications? Again, guys, I'll put this up on my my iDisk so you guys can grab these PowerPoints straight off my iDisk. For let's see. Your name is Stephen in the back, is that right?
Yes.
One of the things that I try to do for the guys is everything that you're seeing on the screen, the PowerPoints, they have access to those. Sometimes it's a day or two later, but I will upload them on a internet site, and then they can go and download them and actually go back and study from them. Or if they, a lot of these guys are, as you can see, they're taking notes. And sometimes we either go too quickly or maybe they didn't catch a few words and they want to go back. And so they have access to everything that you're seeing.
Brad?
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? You got to love my timing. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that cloning creates a life. We are going to talk about, does it have a soul? And then we'll get into stem cells. You guys take a break.